Welcome to ThinkTech, raising public awareness about technology, energy, globalism, and diversification. As part of the ThinkTech series, today's show is Global Connections. I'm your host, Carlos Juarez, and joining me today is my guest, Dr. Ayesha Nibbe of Hawaii Pacific University. Today we're going to be talking about Cuba and a variety of things related to particularly Cuban internationalists and what role they're playing around the world. First, I want to remind you that we broadcast live on the internet at 2 and at 4 every weekday. All of our shows are streamed on ustream.tv and Spreaker.com. If you want the links to our live streams and our previous broadcasts, just go to thinktechhawaii.com. If you want to join us in our downtown studio gallery for any of our shows, just write to j@thinktechhawaii.com. So I'm delighted to welcome our guest today, Dr. Ayesha Nibbe, an assistant professor of anthropology at Hawaii Pacific University. And Ayesha, if I may, before we jump into an introduction about your recent travel to Cuba and a lot of the work you've been doing, if you could just maybe welcome us with a little opening introduction, yourself, some of your background, and from there we'll get a better sense of what your recent travels to Cuba are about. So maybe just give us some background about yourself first.
Okay. I'm originally from California, but I actually grew up all around the world. My parents were actually missionaries in Pakistan as a kid. So I grew up in Pakistan, and I went to a boarding school in the Himalayan mountains while they worked in the plains in Peshawar. So I kind of had a strange upbringing in some respects. But I definitely had a very international sort of outlook, I think, from day one. So I ended up, after I graduated from college, I went to the Peace Corps and I lived in the Amazon for a couple years. And I think as a young person, got really sensitized to poverty in particular, and so I really have focused on that in general in my research. And so I've done research in India and in northern Uganda. Those are sort of my main areas that I've done research in, and now I'm kind of moving into Cuba, which was an outgrowth of my work in Uganda. So I'm kind of, I seem like I'm all over the place, but the sort of general umbrella that it falls under is looking at issues of poverty, I think, is really the focus of all my work.
Great. No, and I think, as you kind of just already indicated, an interesting circuitous route. And while I want us to talk about Cuba, I guess I'd begin by, Cuba, of course, the small island country there in the Caribbean, and we have a very, just complex relationship with the U.S. But by way of your own connection, you mentioned already it was through Africa. You spent several years working in Uganda, and it is in Africa where there is a large Cuban presence itself of what we refer to as Cuban Internationalistas.
Exactly.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I was in northern Uganda working on a project on humanitarianism. Northern Uganda is the site of the longest running conflict in Africa. So I was really primarily looking at the aid intervention in northern Uganda, which is sort of a traditional sort of Western United Nations-led, donor-led intervention, humanitarian intervention. While I was there, I met a Cuban who didn't really fit into the general mold of the rest of the expats that were there.
So in the case of, you have a lot of like NGOs from the U.S., from Europe,
exactly,
and
that
UN agencies,
sort of traditional aid model where Western organizations go to quote unquote third world countries or developing nations or things like that, or war zones, natural disaster areas, which tend to be in those same areas, for the former colony areas, really. That's what I was really focusing on as my project. But I met this Cuban, and he was a former Olympic athlete and had gone on to do his PhD in sports science and was now a professor. And so he was actually sent there by the Cuban government as part of the Cuban Internationalism. Cuban Internationalism has really several arms, I'd say. One of them, which I think most people have heard of, is sending military aid to places like Ethiopia, Angola, and other places, where they basically provide support for popular revolt movements.
Particularly during the Cold War, we saw a lot of this,
Exactly.
their role in helping support different movements, right?
Exactly. Another arm of this is sort of the soft diplomacy arm, which is sending professors, doctors. You've heard about Cuban doctors in Latin America in particular, but they also go to Asia, and they go to Africa as well. So doctors, professors, and other professionals, and sports professionals, they go and either fill gaps in like either the medical arena, or they'll go coach the Olympic teams. A lot of Olympic teams in Africa are coached by Cuban professionals, or they'll go work in the universities. Okay, and the third wing or arm of this is is that they provide scholarships for students from these countries to come to Cuba to become educated, and then they're supposed to go back and serve in their countries. The purpose of Cuban internationalism essentially is the sort of mirror opposite of traditional Western aid. In Western aid, the aim is to keep a relationship with the developing world where in some respects a power relationship is maintained between the former colonial power and the former colonies through the aid relationship. But it is also to promote the creation and the strengthening of markets. So essentially spreading capitalism, right? The Cuban internationalism essentially does the opposite. The goal there is to basically spread socialist doctrine, okay? Either, like I said, through military, through these professionals going overseas, or by bringing people to Cuba to become educated. So it's through a sort of an aid kind of a relationship of sorts, but it's more of an equal kind of relationship. It's not as power laden as the sort of top-down former colony sort of relationship, yeah? But it's very, very similar, but it's just implemented a different way. And I think when I got to know the Cubans, I had never heard of this before, I'd never read about it before, and I started to realize as I was hanging out with these people more and more that this really is a part of the aid story in Africa that hasn't been told at all, or very little. So, except for the military intervention
and
part.
I wonder, you've met the Cuban and obviously got to know more of them, but what else could you describe that made them seem so different in terms of what they were doing or how they were doing it? Is it just the nature of their own organizations, or the mandate they had, or the way they did it? Or I have to guess that, they're probably fairly minimal in terms of what they bring and sort of low cost. I don't know. How could you differentiate those from the more traditional, Western NGOs?
Yeah, it's a very different way of implementing aid. And like I said, it's more of an equal sort of relationship. And the reason that that's the case is Cuba essentially was if you want to put it in that category, a developing nation prior to the revolution. Okay, it had all the same kind of indicators. It had the sort of same political infrastructure, economic infrastructure, and things like that. The revolution shifted a lot of those relationships, but they have a very sort of insular economy. So a doctor, in other words, it's centrally planned, and they've tried to sort of shield it from the larger global economy. Okay, and the way that you do that is by not allowing foreign currency into the domestic economy. So they actually have two separate currencies, okay, that you use differently. You'll use a peso in Cuba, and then there's another currency called CUC, which is for foreign currency. So essentially, it's almost like, I think of it as like a Disneyland kind of economy in a way. In that it's you walk into a completely different world where a doctor makes $20 a month. Okay.
Which for in America, how can you possibly?
How can you live on that?
Oh
Right. But you'll pay 40 cents for your whole electric bill for the month. There are no rents. Okay. It's a socialist system in which the government really controls prices and controls everything and owns everything there. Okay.
And this exists even in the places where they're doing this work. They sort of recreate this micro,
No,
or is
but
that,
that's what happens there. So,
Okay.
but what's happened in recent years since the Soviet Union fell, or since the fall of the Soviet Union, really the Soviet Union was subsidizing a lot of this Cuban economy because they would supply oil to, as a driver of the economy at below world prices. Okay, so when the Soviet Union fell, Cuba entered into what's called the special period. And they could no longer operate under those that economy couldn't operate the same way anymore. And foreign currency started to be desperately needed in order to acquire goods and services. And this is the moment when professionals need to, so there's two things that are going on. Cuba it no longer has the money to do some of the military interventions that they did in Africa and other places during the Cold War, but they also need foreign currency to come in. And this is when this professor and doctor internationalism starts really kicking up into high gear. They send these professionals over to, say, Africa. The professionals who ordinarily would make about $200 a month will make about $300 to $800 a month in Africa. Okay, Olympic coaches, highly trained.
Some of that is being funded by the African countries themselves.
Absolutely. So they'll have a state-to-state agreement where, say, the government of Uganda will say, okay, we need 20 doctors to fill these slots. We need 30 professors to fill such and such slots. We need a boxing coach. We need whatever. Okay, and they send these folks over. Okay, they're able to earn, 10 to 20 times what they'd make in Cuba. They save as much of that money as possible. And then when they come back, they're able to bring that foreign currency back to Cuba in order to buy the goods that they can no longer afford under that Cuban economic system. Okay,
so for those professionals, it's an incentive, almost an opportunity to go and earn some extra money.
It's a huge privilege, but in
for
order
us, when we send the Peace Corps like you did, it's not quite the same. You're sacrificing income to go gain life experience and work in the jungles of the Amazon.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's like a Peace Corps kind of it has more of that kind of a feel to it because it is more of an equal relationship. When I went as a Peace Corps volunteer, I made a little bit more money than the villagers. I was making about $25 a month, but I wasn't making, $10,000 a month. Now, you asked how this is different from other aid workers. A UN aid worker might make $10,000 a month, tax-free, free housing, free car, free gas, 24-hour electricity, 24-hour water. Okay, a Doctors Without Border volunteer makes a lot less, but will make maybe $1,500 a month, or $2,000 a month.
A lot
more. Much more. 5 times more. The lowliest of the aid workers will make more than your highest professional, local staff professional. Okay, so you can see right there the difference between a Cuban internationalist, let's say, and a Western aid worker right there. There's a big differential in terms of that.
Given that, are they also perceived in different ways differently by the local people? Are they, do they become more, not so much local, but maybe more connected to those people in a way where these other Westerners that make more are clearly elites that, just are in a different category? In other words, how else is it reflected in their differences? Okay,
that's a great question. I think because a Cuban essentially is making the same amount of money that a local staff person would make. So they're making as much money as a professor would make in Africa. $300 to $500 or $800 possibly at the high end. So they're making as much money as an African, which means they have to take public transportation. They don't own cars. They'll live in places that oftentimes the universities or places, those institutions will provide housing for them, but they can't go and spend money wildly, right? So they end up shopping in the same places as Africans. So you'll see Cubans kind of going into the bowels of Kampala, right? Into the Chinese markets and things like that, where a lot of, Ugandans will shop. You'd never see an aid worker there in a zillion years. right? So they move in. They actually spatially sort of move in different areas than aid workers will.
That must give them a different status in some respect. Well, this is fascinating, and we will come back. We're going to take a very short break in a moment, and just to remind everyone, I'm Carlos Juarez. This is Global Connections in the ThinkTech radio series. We're talking now with Ayesha Nibbe about Cuba, and particularly Cuban internationalists, and we'll learn more in just a minute. We'll be back, so stay tuned for more of the story.
Aloha, I'm Jay Fidel. I want to tell you about our program this month. We're doing a lunch and panel program at the Plaza Club with the Hawaii Venture Capital Association and ThinkTech about China. It's Don't Be Afraid to Send Your Kid or CEO to China. Stories of daring do and of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the People's Republic. We want to introduce you to some people who have lived in China and show you that life in China is not so bad. It's not all about corruption and environmental degradation and lack of civil or human rights. It's not like that. And we want to have them tell you their day-to-day stories about how they've lived there. So our moderator is Larry Foster. He has taught law in China, and he has been practicing law in China for a firm in Shanghai. His wife, Brenda Foster, is on the panel. She has been the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai. We have Russell Liu. He's an attorney practicing with Shepard Mullen in Beijing for quite some time. Shackley Ruffetto, a circuit court judge from Maui, who after retiring went to China so he could teach judicial process there. And Nikki Shishido, who has worked for DBED, the Department of Business, Economic Development and Tourism of the state of Hawaii, in Beijing for some time. All these people have had the experience of living on the ground in China. We want to have them tell their stories to you. So maybe this will encourage you to send your kid or a CEO to China. So if you're interested in this program, which ought to be very interesting, come down on August 22nd. You can sign up at hvca.org. I'm Jay Fidel. Mahalo. We'll see you there.
Well, we're back, and we're live, and we're ThinkTech, and this is Global Connections on the ThinkTech radio series. We're talking with Ayesha Nibbe about Cuba Internationalism, and just a fascinating story. We often just think of Cuba as this, little island off the Florida coast, but in many ways, Cuba has a footprint, has a long-standing presence in places like Africa, but also other parts of Latin America. And as you came to connect, the work you were doing some years ago in Africa and Uganda suddenly connected you to some Cubans, and you suddenly opened this world of Cuban internationalism. Maybe if you can continue sharing with us, how did that eventually lead you towards connecting and maybe taking more interest in Cuba itself, and maybe more recently opportunities you've had to actually travel to Cuba?
Yeah.
But maybe continue the story about Africa and how that opened up some new connections to Cuba.
Yeah, well, I started spending time with the Cubans. I'm from California. I like hearing Spanish a lot. So that was sort of my break for my research. Over time, I started to, like I said earlier, I started to realize that this was really part of my project in a way. It doesn't really fit neatly into the book I'm writing about humanitarian aid. It is a side project in a sense, but it's very, very related to it. I just wanted to mention, though, you made me sort of think about. You were saying the fact that Cuba is a small island that plays a gigantic role in the consciousness of the global South. And I think this is one thing that a lot of people in the United States don't understand. You say the name Fidel Castro, and it's almost like, you brought up the devil's name or something like that. and this is not the way he's perceived overseas. In particularly, let's say, Africa. You'll see Fidel Castro's picture on the cover of magazines. When people would find out, so a lot of the Cubans that were in, about 60% of Cubans are what we would consider black in America, or African American. There they have different classifications, racial classifications. They have mulatto, which is more mixed, and then they'll have what they call black, which is less mixed, I guess. Every country has a sort of different sort of racial classification and where the lines are drawn and things like that. But a lot of these Cuban internationalists were what we'd call black. And so a lot of, when we walk around, a lot of the Africans would look at these people, these internationalists, and think, now are they from Africa or they're not from here? So I wonder what, and they'd kind of come up and speak in different languages.
Yeah, try out some different.
Right, try out different languages, Lingala or Swahili or some other language. We were in northern Uganda, so they speak Acholi there. They knew not to speak Acholi to them. They knew they weren't Acholi, but they were something, So over time, they'd figure out, a couple minutes into the conversation or a few seconds into it, they'd say, oh, I'm from Cuba. And I can't tell you how many times I heard this saying that would come right after that. Cuba. Cuba has defeated the United States, right?
So in the mind of maybe that African, it might be Cuba's this pretty significant.
A very, very important place. And what they mean, what they mean by defeated is not that they've, militarily overthrown them or even economically, but that they've really kind of frustrated the United States deeply in terms of the ability to, have this sort of hegemonic power over the global South. Economically and politically. Cuba always throws a little monkey wrench into the plan, a lot of times, right? Yeah. And for a lot of places around the world, Cuba represents one little spot where there isn't, that U.S. dominance or Western dominance, right? So it plays a very, very important role. And so it was really interesting for me to see that as well. So I became really interested in this, in part because, these kind of comments were fascinating to me, right?
How they perceive them.
Right. I grew up in Berkeley, where we have the communist bookstore and things like that. I've always been interested in Cuba, in terms of its role globally, and things like that. So I was just generally interested in Cuba anyways. So I basically, as I sort of finished my project in northern Uganda, I've slowly kind of moved into doing Cuba work, in part because of those relationships with those internationalists. A lot of them went home after they completed their service, and I had very, very close relationships with those people. And so as they went home, it's kind of like the stories kept developing, right? I also ended up, because I had a close relationship with the Cubans, I ended up sending my research assistant to Cuba to study medicine. So then I got to see that third arm of Cuban internationalism.
Ugandan research assistant.
My northern Ugandan research assistant who grew up in the camps. Went to Cuba and is now, in his last year of college, studying basically pre-med, but medical science. And so I've gotten to see that for now. It's been 5 years, but I've gotten a very, very up close, intimate look at that whole part of it as well. So it's kind of really the relationships I had have opened up what ordinarily is really close to a lot of researchers, because it's very hard to plan a research project around Cubans because they don't even know where they're going a lot of times. The government will send them somewhere and they don't even know where they're going until the day they're going. Right? So you can't plan around them. You can't plan a project around them. But because I have these relationships, I've been able to see this over the past, now it's been about 7-8 years that I've been in relationship with these people. So, that's giving me a window, and then I can kind of branch out and talk to other people through those relations. And I have trusting relationships. They know that I'm not a spy. Right? No, and this is a very important, trust is very, very important as an anthropologist, and they trust me.
These are the people. Of course, you've had some recent trips to Cuba, and there the officials are still kind of checking you out. They have their Ayesha file, and as you might share with us there. But maybe by way of that segue, so you returned after the years you spent in Uganda, back at the University of California. You were at Davis completing work for your PhD studies, and now since then you've been out of there for several years now. You are now part of a group of research scholars from the University of California, part of a UC academic initiative on Cuba. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when I got back when I sent my research assistant to Cuba, I had no idea. I knew we had an embargo, but I had no idea what that meant exactly. Well, what it means is we haven't had mail service with Cuba since 1963. What it means is you can't travel there. Right?
Very easily.
What it means is during the Bush administration, you couldn't send money down there very easily. Okay? So how on earth do I take care of this kid who's an orphan and I've sent him to Cuba to study? Okay? So this was like, I think, the sort of primary.
I got a cousin in Mexico who can help.
Oh, okay, yeah, right. But you have to be very creative, yeah? Well, I found out about this University of California Cuba Academic Initiative, which was coincidentally starting that year. And so I got the guts up to write to the head of the UC Cuba Academic Initiative, and I said, okay, I don't speak Spanish. I really don't know that much about Latin American studies. I'm an Africanist. But I had a very close relationship with Cubans in Africa, and I need to go to Cuba at some point, and I need some advice on how I can go there, or how I can have some kind of way to send goods and money and things like that down there. And I said, I'm also interested at some point in possibly segueing into writing about these internationalists. Well, a lot of times when you write to, somebody who's kind of important and, head of some big institute or something, you'll hear maybe never. But maybe it'll take a few days to hear back. I heard back from this guy in 5 minutes.
He was waiting for your email right then, yes.
No, but he was really excited
respond,
because no one had written about internationalists, and because of the reasons I told you, you can't plan a project around these people. And so he said he wanted to meet with me and invited me to join a conference, and then I ended up even getting a scholarship to go to Cuba, a fellowship to go to Cuba the next summer. So I show up at this conference, and I was a bit intimidated because I thought, I feel like an imposter, But I realized, and I've realized as I've spent more and more time with this group, that I actually play a very important role in Cuba studies because I'm not Cuban, because I don't walk in with the baggage of, or I'm not a Cuba scholar, per se. I don't walk in with the baggage, the ideological baggage that a lot of Cuban scholars have, which is very sort of Miami, Havana centric. Yeah. And I had a window into Cuba that a lot of people never have. In fact, I probably spent more time with, Castro Cubans in Africa. I spent 2.5 years with these people. Okay, I probably spent more time with them than a lot of scholars ever get to. Who gets to go to Cuba for 2.5 years and spend time trusting relationships with people? So I realized that and we weren't in Cuba, so they could speak to me more freely. Okay, so I realized that insight actually helped me to really contribute a lot to Cuba studies, actually.
No, you helped fill an important void there, no doubt. And like you described, not something that could have been easily planned or that they could go out and find the right person. Well, this is a fascinating angle, and then as we continue, I want us to turn to actually your experiences going to Cuba, including a more recent trip. We're going to take a very short break right now. I'm Carlos Juarez. This is Global Connections in the ThinkTech radio series. We're talking with Ayesha Nibbe about Cuba and issues related to Cuban internationalists. We'll be back in just a short moment. Thank you.
We want to thank our underwriters.
Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Maui Electric on Maui and Hawaii Electric Light Company on Hawaii Island are deeply committed to the communities they serve.
Galen Ho is a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company.
The High Tech Development Corporation, the state's leading technology agency, attached to the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism.
Castle and Cook Hawaii, with a time-honored legacy that spans more than 160 years and revolves around its mission of investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state.
Hawaii Gas, formerly the Gas Company, a proponent of the Liquefied Natural Gas Initiative, helping Hawaii achieve its transition to clean energy and a better energy future.
Collateral Analytics, a Hawaii-based tech company empowering the real estate industry with greater and faster access to the tools and data they need to make better informed property investment decisions.
I'm Nicole Horry. Thanks so much for joining us on ThinkTech.
I'm Maria Kashem. See you next time.
Aloha, I'm Jay Fidel. This is our ThinkTech News. Apple will hold its iPhone event September 10th, and the rollout of the company's iconic smartphone can't come soon enough. Apple is expected to launch a lower-cost iPhone targeted at emerging markets, as well as an iPhone 5S. Apple hasn't launched much in 2013, and its board members are pushing for more innovation. Android is highly competitive. Apple has had hit-or-miss quarters, but a so-so quarter for Apple is ridiculously profitable. Everyone is waiting for iTV or some other smart invention, maybe a smart watch. Piper Jeffries noted expectations for the latest iPhone are low. They said, "We believe growth is shifting to the low end and to emerging markets, while high-end smartphone replacement rates are elongating, taking longer." A compelling offering by Apple could interrupt that trend. But we don't believe the iPhone 5S is that phone, as it has little to differentiate itself from the iPhone 5 or other high-end smartphones. We believe people are likely to skip the 5S and wait for the 6 with its larger screen. Apple is expected to sell 30 million iPhones in the third quarter, 45 million in the fourth quarter, and 29 million in the first quarter of 2014. The iPhone 5 is holding up well in the secondary market, so existing iPhone owners aren't necessarily waiting for the latest device from Apple. This is Jay Fidel. That's our ThinkTech News. Aloha.
We're back, we're live, and we're ThinkTech. This is Global Connections on the ThinkTech radio series, and we're here talking with Ayesha Nibbe about Cuba, Cuban Internationalism, and you've given us a quick snapshot of how you came to connect and learn about Cuba through some Cubans in northern Uganda, where you spent some years, and eventually connecting to a large community of research scholars from the University of California that are part of an academic initiative. And I wonder if you could maybe now lead us into getting a snapshot. You've had a couple of trips now to Cuba, including a very recent one. You've just returned, and of course Cuba is undergoing dramatic transformation and changes, and it's a country that just, quite a paradox of all the challenges that it has faced, but a story that, in our narrative we often just don't see much about it. It's very polarized, very politicized. Tell us a little bit about what, how you got there for the first time, and then you described a scholarship that it gave you an opportunity to travel in the summer, and then more recently you've gone back just this past couple of weeks ago, this past summer you were there once again.
Yeah, so like I said, I was able to get this scholarship to go to Cuba in 2008. And so most of my internationalist friends had actually returned to Cuba at that point. So I basically walked into a situation. I've never really experienced Cuba as a tourist. I walked in there and really kind of immediately got into real life Cuba. So when I talk to people about my experiences in Cuba, they'll say, "Oh, did you go to this bar and that hotel?" And I said, I peeled garlic and was feeding pigs and stuff like that. So I don't, holding babies and things like that. I have a different experience in Cuba, standing in lines to get stuff, and I've had that kind of an experience there. So which I think is another kind of interesting. Again, I've had those trusting relationships with people, and so they, let me into their everyday lives. But when I went the first time, I wasn't actually allowed to stay with those friends because they, like I said before, the Cuban government really tries to shield the domestic economy. But it's not just about the economy, it's also about ideology in some respects. And so when I went in 2008, even at that point, it felt more like you had to be a little bit careful about what you talked about in public, to a certain extent who you were seen with. And I could not sleep at the house of my friends or in their families. That was impossible. So what I would do, what they have there is they do have hotels in Cuba, but I wasn't staying in the tourist areas. So what they also have are these things called casas particulares, right? Casas particulares, and they are basically rooms that are rented
In a private home.
in private homes.
But carefully selected in mind, whatever.
Absolutely. So people that are sort of ideologically sound, I would say, have a place that's represents Cuba well, I would say, structurally, right? And so I rented a room from a place like that happened to be down the street, a block away from the family I was with. So I basically would go there to sleep, and then I would go spend the whole day and peel garlic and pick up babies and things like that. So I really got to see an interesting time in Cuba's history, because in 2000, I went in 2009. Yeah, in 2009, when we had the economic crash, the global economic crash, that affected everybody in the world, including Cuba. Now, you might ask, why did it affect Cuba if they're supposed to be shielded from the global economy? Well, because they still do get some goods and services a lot of goods and services from overseas. So for example, they'll get rice from China, or they get a lot of electronics from China and things like that. So when when prices, and then we had this global food crisis that started kicking in actually when I was in Africa, where when gas prices go up, food prices go up also, because fossil fuels are used for fertilizer. So that also affected food prices in Cuba. So when I went to Cuba in 2009, they were also, just like we were in the US, facing an economic a hardship period. And so I was there during Carnival, and people were it was very muted compared to usual, where people have a lot of fun. Yeah. You could really get that sense of, people are really struggling actually to make ends meet. And I think that in some respects, because I had, I was friends with these internationalists who had recently returned from Africa and had some of those cash reserves, they were probably a little bit better off than other people, but even they were really feeling the pinch. And so you really got that sense of that hardship and that kind of thing at that point. Another thing now for me, one thing that I found interesting was, I'm used to being in, the capitalist world where we have free enterprise, and, you can start a small business. You go to places in Latin America, you see little stands where they sell, chiclets and I don't know what, or whatever, right?
Entrepreneurs, anybody can start up a little.
Right, a little kid can do it, right? Well, in Cuba, even if you see a little stand on the side of the road that's selling they don't have Coke there because that's a U.S. product, but it's called Coca-Cola. So even if you see, somebody selling some Coca-Cola kind of things, drinks or things like that, every single business at that point was run by the government. Even little stalls, and, somebody selling avocados on the side of the road, that was a government-run enterprise, okay? So that was just really bizarre to me, to think that even these little stalls are run by the government. It just made you get this sense of the glut of the centrally planned economy and how inefficient it is in a lot of respects. And it really was in that state of moribund, overripe socialism at that point, and people were really kind of frustrated with it. My research assistant, Tony, who went there to study, told me some funny stories about some of the things that happened, that would happen in Cuba. So there's a official government haircutter, okay? And he'd go there and he'd get his haircut, and he hated the style. He's a 20-something-year-old guy. He doesn't have a, bad haircut. So he started asking people, hey, is there any other place where I can get a haircut? And so they said, okay, so there's this guy, and you got to go, Sergio. Yeah, you got to go down this alley. And so we go to this alley and then ask that person. And so they kind of stand there and they're yeah, blah, 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 and act like they're having another conversation. And then, oh yeah, okay, go there. And you kind of make your way to Sergio, and then you knock on the door and you come in, you act like you're coming for a visit, and then, whoosh, a curtain comes and you get your hair cut. And or one time I wanted to buy ice cream for one of the daughters was having her birthday. So we go to the Copelia, which is the place where they have ice cream. And I said, they told us the price, and, my host kind of, almost choked. And so he said, we'll go somewhere else. So we went to this other place, and we go sit there, and we were waiting, and they said, oh, he'll be back in 5 minutes. So he comes finally, and we talk a little bit, like it's a visit. And then he says, so what would you like, orange or vanilla? And I was like, can I taste it? Sure. So he goes and gets a spoon out of his drawer, gives me a taste, and I go, okay, we'll get the vanilla. And he takes a big chunk of it, puts it in a plastic bag, and we walk down the street with this ice cream. And I said, wait, does he make ice cream in the back of his house? And he says, no, I'll explain to you later. And then he explains to me that that ice cream was from the Copelia, but that he steals the ice cream and then sells it at a much lower price. And he says, yes, he's been to jail about 8 times. We call him El Gato because he creeps quietly. The cat, right?
Ice cream thief.
So, but everybody had some kind of small business. They're selling cigarettes out of the front of their, secretly selling cigarettes, or they've got something going on in order to make ends meet. So this was really, and to me, this is really fun because, it's like you can't just go and buy something. It's an adventure to go, But the thing that happened this past, I guess it was this, about less than a year ago, is that Raul Castro came into power.
The
brother of Fidel Castro, and basically allowed free enterprise, small businesses. And I think it's up to a certain point. I don't think you can have sort of a large business, but small businesses. So if you want to sell, I don't know, produce, avocados, or it's some small enterprises, yeah. And I'm telling you, I went back this past year, and they have small businesses everywhere. Now, if you hadn't been there before, this just looks normal, right? For any Latin American country you go, in every corner there's something, there's business, small little people selling stuff.
This is a sea change for Cuba.
Yeah, instantly. People were out there selling stuff. And because of that, people are starting to become better off. And I did feel a lot of people, they openly talk about now, another thing they're allowed to do now also, before they weren't allowed to go out to work unless they were an internationalist. But to become an internationalist, you had to be, a pretty
screened and
very screened. You had to be ideologically sound. You had to be highly qualified, amazing specimen of Cuba overseas, right?
Representative.
Now everyone's allowed to go and they can have a contract overseas. Okay, so people talk openly about, I want to do a business. One of my friends is a food science professor, now retired, and he specializes in meat production, and he wants to start making sausages and hams out of fish that he can sell to the Muslim, the Arab market, because Muslims don't eat pork, right? So he wants to make ham out of fish, and he talks about this openly. In fact, we actually were called into immigration to verify what I was doing there, and so they asked me a lot of questions and stuff. And my friend had to come in as well. And he actually openly talked about the fact that he wanted to do this business with the immigration people. And I mean, I felt like my jaw, almost hit the floor, because it's really shifted. It's really shifted. And people, talk to you about, if I'm a boxer, professionally trained, and, is there any chance that I can have a small contract overseas for a month or something like that? And so there's definitely a sense of people can breathe again a little bit. And you can definitely one person actually said to me, we're free now. This is the way socialism was supposed to be, right?
It took them a while to loosen a bit, relax some of these restrictions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Because socialism doesn't have to mean a centrally planned economy. You can have a market economy with socialism.
That's really what characterizes a lot of particularly what European countries that have got a mixed economy of sorts.
Right.
Gosh, well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I mean, as you've had a chance to witness some of the transformations, and surely Cuba's going to continue to be a puzzle in transition. Years ago, I remember we might speculate that it could be a very dramatic, and draconian, but as we're probably seeing what you described, it's more like it's kind of happening already on some level. And so when whatever finally comes, it'll probably not be the big bang that was feared, some dramatic incident, but rather almost just a fait accompli. It's already happening, and now you have the rise of young entrepreneurs and sort of incipient capitalism happening there. It'll be interesting to see the transitions and how it plays out, and our complex relationship with Cuba will continue to be part of that puzzle. We're out of time here as we're getting near the end, but I just really appreciate this opportunity to learn about how you got connected through, as it happens, Africa, how you then got connected to a group of scholars out of the University of California, how you got to Cuba now on several occasions, and in those recent visits been able to see already a transforming place. We'll look forward to continuing this conversation. I know we'll have you back for some more on some of these travels and travails, but we'll have to wrap it up with this. I thank you again. I'm Carlos Juarez. This is Global Connections in the ThinkTech radio series. We've been talking with Professor Ayesha Nibbe about Cuba, about Africa, about the internationalists that come out of Cuba and in fact spread their tentacles around the world. I want to thank you all for being here. I'd also like to thank many people who helped bring this show together, the production manager, David Plona, our communications director, Chrissy Guffigan, and Jay Fidel, who somehow puts it all together for us. And thanks to you, our listeners, for listening. ThinkTech will be back, as always, for the next show in our ThinkTech series, so please tune in. If you want to get our daily email and social media program advisors, make sure to click the link on thinktechhawaii.com. If you'd like to be a guest, a sponsor, or a ThinkTech underwriter, contact Jay at thinktechhawaii.com. Thanks so much. And remember, we broadcast live on the internet at 2 and at 4 p.m. every weekday. All of our shows are streamed on ustream.tv and Spreaker.com. If you want the links to our live streams of any previous broadcasts on YouTube, just go to thinktechhawaii.com. Go there and to our Facebook page and tell them that you like us. And of course, I'll see you next week for more on Global Connections. Aloha.